Welcome to my madness. And I would have to be mad to be talking about Christian nationalism, which, by the way, cannot be confused with Christianity because there are significant differences, particularly since Christian nationalism tends to follow the conservative viewpoint, which means literal and translation of the Bible as the Word of God. Oh, and we'll get to some of the rest of it in a moment. And Christianity, which is very different, particularly mainstream Christianity, because it's more progressive, it's more inclusive, it's more friendlier. So there's probably a bunch of videos already out there about Christian nationalism. I've already done the two earlier ones, and I'm going to try and wrap it up with this third one here. And we're going to talk about potential benefits and supporters' viewpoints. And the supporters of Christian nationalism often see the movement as a path to restoring what they believe to be lost moral clarity and unity. They tell us that grounding the government in Christian values could lead to stronger family structures and to reduced crime and moral decay. So let's look at the family structure, which is believed to have begun to weaken after the 1960s with divorce. Well, naturally, it can't be any other thing. It has to be divorce. In their eyes, it has to be divorce, because in their eyes, how does the phrase go? Let no man tear asunder what God has brought together. Well, the first thing we have to keep in mind with the family structure, and particularly in the United States, is that it begins with a contract. And that contract is between the husband and wife. And in the United States, particularly within this group within the United States, they prefer that once a female signs that marriage certificate, that marriage contract, they have legally become the property of the husband. And believe it or not, they still are of that opinion today. And just to give you an idea, I'm going to share a little bit from Samantha Michaels. Trump's defense secretary seems to admire men who want to stop women from voting. And this was published August 9th of 2025. And she has written that on Thursday of August of 2025, Thursday before August 9th, Hegseth, who oversees the U.S. military, reposted a CNN video on the social media site X about Doug Wilson, co-founder of the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. I guess they couldn't get it right the first time. And the video notes that Wilson views women as subservient to men and says that in his ideal Christian society, they would not be able to cast ballots. Subservient, key word, to men. You can thank Paul for that. And in another instance, and we'll look at Julia Simmons, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reposts video of pastors saying women shouldn't vote. And again, this was published August 9th of 2025. She quotes Doug Wilson as saying, women are the kind of people that people come out of. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to have children, to birth people. And he also defended, Wilson also defended previous comments where he had said there was a mutual affection between slaves and their masters, between subservient women and their masters, men. That's a little, what do they call it? Chauvinistic? Let's see what else might be here. And Sean Parnell, the chief Pentagon spokesman, tells us that the secretary, meaning Hegseth, is very much appreciates many of Mr. Wilson's writings and teachings. He's like that also. He is like that also. You have to wonder how many people in Mr. Trump's cabinet and in Congress and other key positions in the government are Christian nationalist supporters, if not Christian nationalists themselves. And we have to keep in mind that even though Mr. Trump distances himself from the Christian nationalist label, a lot of what he's done supports their belief system. And also, same article here, Andrew Whitehead, a sociology professor at Indiana University, Indianapolis, tells us that it's not just that they have these personal Christian beliefs about the role of women in the family. It's that they want to enforce those for everybody. Everybody. You hear that? Women, everybody. All women should be subservient to men. All women are slaves to men. This is what they support. Which is very, well, it's more than just disappointing, of course. And then there is in Samantha Michaels' article, there is the idea that Hegseth's former sister-in-law filed an affidavit stating that his belief is that women should not work. Oh, and that no means yes. These are the people that the majority of the United States put in power. Oh, you can say, no, they voted for Mr. Trump, but Mr. Trump put them in power. But, by default, this is what they demanded. We have to wonder about what has been set loose on this country. And, this is what they say strengthens the family structure. The man with all of his slaves. That's what it amounts to. Whatever the woman brings forth in that contract belongs to the man because, well, United States and various other cultures, what the woman brings with her becomes the man's. So the children become the man's. And, these are the slaves who are subservient to the master. This is what strengthens the family structure. No wonder the divorce rate is, well, according to them, so high. Who wants to marry? What kind of a, well, I shouldn't even go there. But it's all questionable. And they tell us that the rise in divorce, it peaked during the 1980s, has led to increased single parent households, changing the perception of marriage. Damn right, changes the perception of marriage. There should be equality there. But the best thing you can do is live together, because once that contract is in place, what's the saying? $50 to get married, $150 to part ways. So what else do they have listed here that might change the family dynamics, or rather, I should say, that contribute to an unstable home life? Wait, I've got that wrong. I'm sorry. What contributes to a stable home life? Yes, consider this. During the 1950s and 60s, there was widespread domestic abuse. Now, mind you, this was widespread before the 50s and 60s, but this is when it started to become noticeable. And it was considered a family matter. However, even today, this domestic abuse is underreported. It still exists. And again, you sign that piece of paper, it becomes a contract. Why is it a contract? Because it has to be witnessed and it has to be registered with the state. And because of that, the man owns everything. Of course, divorce, it can be split down the middle, but if you have kids, forget about it. Nothing gets split down the middle. And if Christian nationalists come into full power, right now they've got a large foot in the door, but if it should happen to get more, this can change. This can change. And has anybody considered that this may be why the birth rate is so low? Of course, then again, we have to consider the huge expenses that are part of all of this. Houses they're not just a few $1,000s or tens of $1,000s. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars. Try and do that on your own. And the middle class, well, the middle class is here. But these things are even starting to be priced out of the middle class's range. Of course, then again, you factor in inflation, and a $150,000 house is probably what used to be $30,000. Unfortunately, I don't think wages have caught up yet. Oh, another one. And what else have we got? rising costs of child care. Those programs that were to assist the family with children are now being cut away, slimmed down, eliminated. So you take away the carrot, the only thing that's left is the stick, and the stick is not going to get you much. Well, let's consider this idea of reduced crime and moral decay. So overall, crime in the United States, according to the FBI's 2023 evaluations, is down. Cool, right? Well, according to Mr. Trump, that is false. It's a lie. And here's a little something from Rachel Treisman's August 14, 2025 article. Mayors of Democratic cities beyond DC decry Trump's takeover, and consider this. Okay. Mr. Trump tells us that you look at Chicago, how bad it is. You look at Los Angeles, how bad it is. We have other cities that are very bad. New York has a problem. And then, of course, Baltimore and Oakland. We don't even mention that anymore. They're so far gone. And we're not going to lose our cities over this. This is what he had to say about Washington, D.C. And this comes from Ine O's The National Guard is Coming to D.C., which was published August 11, 2025. And Trump has announced that crime, savagery, filth, and scum will disappear. I will make our capital great again. Again. And consider this. Overall, crime in Washington, D.C., including carjackings, has been steadily dropping. In fact, officials cited a 30-year low for violent crime back in January. A 30-year low. And mind you, moral decay, they want to strengthen morals. And we have a leader. Well, I can't even say leader. Well, leader, government, administration, whatever you want to call it, that routinely practices in deception. Now, morals are a matter of personal interpretation. And with that, that means that people make their own evaluations. They determine their own morals. And fewer people are using religion as a moral compass and are beginning to rely on societal norms. And societal norms include that people are okay with the idea of dishonesty being used for personal gain. You don't believe me? All you have to do is read the news articles about Mr. Trump. And hey, the family structure being strengthened, we have a man here who says it's okay to grope a woman. It's okay. Just walk up there, grab a handful of behind, and, it's okay. The president says it's okay. If he can do it, anybody can do it. right? Where are our morals? Huh? It's painful, very painful. Well, let's consider criticisms and challenges. Of course, believe it or not, that was its strengths and supporters. Hmm. So, criticisms. While some may see Christian nationalism as a means of restoring morals, yeah, right, restoring morals. Isn't one of those commandments, thou shalt not lie? Oh, that's right. That's something entirely different. That's Judaism. That's got nothing to do with Christianity. Right. So much for restoring morals, right? And most people think of morals as being tied to religious views. And in this instance, Christian values, which are said to, Christian values are said to include compassion, which is a sense of shared feelings, or better known as empathy, something that Christian nationalism does not advocate. I wonder how that works out with the teachings of Jesus. Interesting. Here's something else I'd like to share with you about morals and such. I think it was during the 70s, there was this set of experiments that came to be known as the Milgram experiment. And Milgram was researching patriotism. And as part of his experiments or as part of his research into patriotism, he made a very important discovery, which is something I would like to share with you. Just one particular instance that I recall, and that was that in these experiments, you have the Confederate and you have the subject. And the subject is the one being studied. The Confederate is the one who may be antagonistic towards the subject, or is the oh how I can't is either the antagonist or the one who receives from the subject. And in this instance, the subject would ask questions or something of that nature. And for every incorrect response, they would press a button. They would administer an electric shock. And the voltage would increase each time. Now, the Confederate was at the receiving end of these shocks. And he was instructed to scream louder each time, something along those lines. But that's not the point. And after the experiment, the subject, you would think, would be more concerned about the Confederates' well-being. But they were not concerned about the Confederates' well-being. They were more concerned about themselves. They made it a point to explain that what they did was not their responsibility. They were instructed to do that. What's wrong with this scene? And there was another Milgram experiment in which college students participated. And in this particular experiment, you had a handful of students that were prison guards, and the rest of the students were prisoners. And what they discovered was that the guards were more likely to abuse the prisoners than not, or more likely to abuse the prisoners than the prisoners were to abuse themselves. The point that was demonstrated is that here is the person who is giving the instructions, and here is the person who is fulfilling or carrying out those instructions. Which one is at fault? Common sense tells you the one carrying out the instructions. But according to the one carrying out the instructions, they were not responsible. They were merely following orders. A restoration of morals. Right. First, we have to determine what is moral. And then it has to be disseminated so everybody follows the same thing. However, Christian values are supposed to include empathy. And, again, we come back to this. Well, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. Let me wait a moment here. I want to share something else with you. Paul, in his writing, stated that same-sex intercourse was an abomination. And what do you do with an abomination? You annihilate it. Now, if God is nature, okay, and we see same-sex participants in nature, well, you're going to see it in humankind as well. However, common sense stops there. Common sense tells the majority of the people that these are animals and we are better. If we are like animals, then it's their problem and they must be destroyed because nature has no influence over us. Well, that's a load because today we have scientists, but if you listen to the rhetoric, science is someone else's fantasy. But according to science, somebody asked the question, okay, what causes homosexuality? What is the cause of this? What is the root of this? And so they explore. And what they discovered was that it's a natural process. It's caused by hormones, poor signals someplace along the line, but they are born like that. They just don't wake up and say, oh, well, I'm going to be gay, or I'm going to be lesbian, or I'm going to be transgender. I am a female trapped in a male's body. It doesn't work that way. Nature has done this. God made them that way. I don't know what else to say. Don't know what else to say. But when Paul said that they were an abomination, he gave people permission to annihilate them, to kill them, to get rid of them, to destroy them. And you have to ask yourself, I ask this question, how does what's being done to transgenders, to homosexuals, how is that supporting the teaching of Jesus? After all, Jesus taught, and he wasn't the only one to teach this, love thy neighbor. Jesus taught, love thy enemy. Jesus taught, love thy God. And love is to nourish, nurture, support, provide assistance. Love has nothing to do with marginalize, destroy, kill, ridicule, oppress. It's not love. Yet, the Christian nationalists claim to follow the Bible explicitly, except for those parts that don't agree with their interpretation. So, critics also say that Christian nationalism undermines pluralism and democratic norms, which include erosion of religious freedom for non-Christians, the potential for authoritarian governance under the guise of divine authority, conflicts with international human rights standards. So let's look at this erosion of religious freedom for non-Christians. So the Christian nationalist prefers restrictions for those who are Muslim. They see Buddhism as incompatible and are opposed to those whose spiritual practices are not in alignment with theirs or undermine their values, which, by the way, includes myself, because I am a spiritual leader that teaches spirituality that is supported by science, philosophy, and the observation of nature. And mind you, a lot of what we see in nature is also in the human race. Same societal norms in nature, same societal norms in the human race. Yes. And then we have this idea of religious freedom. And as it is written in the Constitution, it does not specifically indicate any religious preference. It does not say in the Constitution that all religions shall be able, or that, let me try this again, that people shall be able to express their religion regardless of ethnicity or origin. There's nothing in there that says anything close to it. All it says is that the United States shall not establish a religion. Now, establish can be interpreted as to create a religion. There's nothing about supporting a religion that's already in existence or already widely practiced. And in this case, Christian nationalism. So let's come back to this. Let's continue with this whole idea of religious freedom. Now, when the Constitution was written, okay, Buddhism and its ideas were just beginning to work their way through Europe and probably hadn't made their way to the colonies. Of course, those who traveled to Europe, like Benjamin Franklin, were probably already aware of Buddhist teachings. And Muslim teachings were already there. So what we come down to is that how they can reinterpret the Constitution. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but this ties in with religion, because we seem to think that there is a separation between state and religion, and there's not. There's an implied separation, but nothing that clearly states that. And they can arguably state that the United States was based on Christian values, and this whole idea of freedom of religion was directed towards the different versions of Christianity after all. That was why the Puritans left England in the first place, was to express, to practice their version of Christianity. And the potential for authoritarian governance under the guise of divine authority, well, governance under the guise of divine authority has already taken place in the United States at least twice. At least twice. One of those times is how we ended up with California, all the western states, Texas. I'm not sure if New Orleans was, if the Louisiana Purchase was part of that or not. I don't quite recall. But, that expansion of the United States was declared to be divine manifestation. So, and as we go into this, a theocracy, which is where the government officials are also the religious leaders, that can't happen here. However, the closest we can come to that is an autocracy, and Bernie Sanders has already spoken about that. I think I even mentioned this in a previous presentation. But in an autocracy, authority centers around a single being, a single person, and the laws that are invoked, or in this case, executive orders that are invoked, may be based on religious writings or doctrine and disguised as policy. So the liberties that we enjoy now can become restricted according to a particular religious doctrine. And if the Christian nationalists fully come to power, this religious doctrine is going to be their version, not everybody else's, but their version. And we will get to that in a moment. Now, conflicts with international human rights standard. That's already happened. Already happened. As pointed out earlier, Christian nationalism could have a significant impact on human rights, including influencing policies that may harm or are intended to harm marginal populations, immigrants, tourists, as well as transgenders and homosexual people. Harm marginal populations. And then we've got the Supreme Court of Alabama granting embryos the status of minor children. Policy based on religious doctrine. It's already happening. And we've got some states that have passed laws that allow businesses to deny services to individuals based on religious beliefs. Again, policy. It's already happening. The wrongful imprisonment of alleged illegal and legal immigrants kept in facilities that violate human rights, shipped off to El Salvador, that violates human rights. The United States has actually partaken, or participated rather, in human trafficking. It's already happening. So legal experts also point out the potential for constitutional crises, which I've already indicated here, particularly around the First Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. The purpose of Equal Protection Clause was to prevent racial discrimination. However, it's expanded. The foot is in the door. The foot is in the door to strip it down and get rid of it. The ability of businesses to refuse services based on religious belief may impair the authority of the clause. Again, the whole idea of separation of church and state is an idea that is implied in the Constitution and the amendments in the Bill of Rights, all of that. It's implied, but it's never clearly stated, which means it can be challenged in new ways. One of the main elements of a free world is liberty. And liberty is the ability to live your life without interference from others and in kind, by not interfering in the manner in which others choose to live. Gone. Most see this as preventing the government from interfering with the lives of people, but there's more to it. The U.S. Constitution portrays liberty as a fundamental right. Everybody has it. Particularly, now, the purpose of a constitution is to protect the rights of the minority. So, particularly, the minorities. Liberty is a fundamental right, particularly of the minorities. And for those reasons, our Constitution is threatened. You don't have to have a whole lot of reasons for it. Just that one right there. Liberty. That one right there. Creating policy that gives people the right to impose their life upon others with no regard. I think that's called oppression. So the rights of the minority are beginning to disintegrate. And at the same time, there is a failure to understand the responsibility of liberty. You have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to not impose your belief, your lifestyle, your ideas, etc., upon those who are in disagreement. And we've already covered areas where that is gone. Liberty and the protection of the minorities is slowly disintegrating. And the advent of a government heavily influenced by traditional Christian values, traditional, not mainstream, but traditional, may also open the way to civil disruption. Some could call it civil war. Others would call it civil disobedience. In protests, it's already happening. And keep this in mind, there are 4 major denominations which influence the government. There are the evangelical Protestants, Catholics, mainstream Protestants, and Christian nationalists. And Christian nationalists isn't really a religion, it's more of a political movement. And among these 4, there are significant differences with their core beliefs. Evangelicals, which have been closely associated with Christian nationalists, emphasize the born-again experience and that the Bible is the Word of God and is infallible. Infallible. Never mind that it was written by human hands, but it is infallible. Catholics, they follow the authority of the Pope. Remember that. Mainline Protestants practice a progressive theology that advocates for social justice, inclusivity, and historical interpretation of the scripture. Historical means this is the way it was interpreted, but they're more progressive. In Christian nationalism, well, it may not be a denomination, but as a movement, it seeks to bring all the denominations under an evangelical doctrine, meaning that they all have to come under that umbrella, and not all of them will do that. After all, the evangelicals were once part of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church at one time was it. That was it. And then slowly people separated. Lutherans, Protestants, evangelicals, Baptists, the list goes on. So as we wrap this up, a U.S. government influenced by Christian nationalism would be dramatically different from what you are accustomed to. While it may bring a renewed sense of purpose for some, it will also lead to significant legal, cultural, and societal tensions. You are already seeing that now. And as citizens, it is crucial for you to engage with these ideas thoughtfully. Not without thought, but thoughtfully. How can you express yourself without falling into their trap or falling for their bait? How can you do this? Well, one, you engage in the voting process, because by not voting, you have by default voted to establish exactly what we are experiencing now. Those who did not vote in the last election, last presidential election, by default voted for Mr. Trump. They asked for all of this. They didn't demand it like the voters did, but they asked for all of this. They were okay with it. And pluralism, meaning two parties or more, system of government, and democratic integrity depend on inclusive dialogue, which is not there. It's Republicans, it's Democrats. Right now, it's Republicans. And this time, they're being smart. They're looking at ways to increase their numbers. They're looking for ways to actively stay in power. Democratic integrity depends on values that elevate public life, values that are good for everybody, which, and this too has been slowly disappearing for the last 2 decades. The last 2 decades, it's Democrats in power, it's Republicans in power, it's Democrats in power, now it's Republicans in power. Each one dismantles all that the other one did, regardless of whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. Regardless. That's just stupid. So, the form of government that we are left with, ultimately, regardless of what you may choose to believe, rests in how or whether you choose to vote, participate. And, like I said earlier, you've probably heard this all before. I'm sure a lot of people have posted videos and such about Christian nationalists, railed about what's going on and everything. I want to be informative. And yes, in some cases, I was biased because it affects me. It affects me. And just to give you a thought here as we part, I was curious about why people would vote or would want something that is so harmful to so many. Are more educated people more apt to vote against what is taking place than poorly educated people? And the response was nope. So my theory was that, the better educated you are, the more likely you are to make good decisions. However, what I discovered was that roughly within the United States, half the population are analytical thinkers, which means the other half of the population is not. However, even with half the population being analytical thinkers and everything, if what the conclusions these analytical thinkers come to are in contrary to their beliefs, they're dismissed and they follow their beliefs. And beliefs require no facts, require no investigation. And it's all about whether you feel good or not. Well, I can tell you, I do not feel good with what is happening. I want to thank you for sitting through this. I apologize if I bored you. I hope this was informative. And, if it was, subscribe. No, I don't publish regularly, but I do my best. I do my best. And in the meantime, you have a wonderful time.